Today we're delighted to have with us Dr. Yanzhong Huang. Welcome, Yanzhong. Yanzhong Huang is a professor and director of global health studies at Seton Hall University School of Diplomacy and International Relations. Also senior fellow for global health at the Council on Foreign Relations, where he directed the Global Health Governance Roundtable series, among his many other affiliations. Also a member of National Committee on U.S.-China Relations. He's going to talk to us about his book here on environmental health, but he's also the author of Governing Health in Contemporary China in 2013, which was a really lens on China's health governance, using health governances to understand the evolving political system in China. And Yanzhong has done it again with his latest book on environmental health, what we're going to be talking about today. So Toxic Politics is a really fascinating read, examining how the worsening environmental crises in China, particularly focusing on air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution, and using these crises to kind of create a lens through which we can examine the institutional structure and the changes under the Xi Jinping era, where we have some contradictions, stricter enforcement, but also deeper problems, maybe deeper pathology. And the book really takes us on a journey through his own upbringing and goes into the science and policy of these complex environmental topics and brings in a rich variety of theory and arguments on China politics. So it really is a fascinating, exciting read. Some may recall that Yanzhong joined us for a webinar earlier in the year on the COVID outbreak to discuss its connections to and his research on SARS. So welcome back, Yanzhong. Thank you for joining us. Briefly, what we're going to be trying to condense into this hour-long webinar, which will hopefully do some justice to the book, is we're going to have about a 25-minute presentation by Yanzhong, and then we're going to have the remainder half hour or so moderated discussion. Please use the Q&A function, and you can throw those up there throughout the talk as questions arise, and then we'll get to those after the presentation by Yanzhong. So with that, do you want to take us away?
Well, thank you, Michael, for that very nice introduction. I wish I could be visiting your beautiful place. Now it's freezing cold outside, and I really wish I could be in San Diego now. So let me share the screen. See. Okay. All right, as Michael has just say, well, this book is entitled Toxic Politics, China's Environmental Health Crisis and its Challenge to the Chinese State. The book has two parts. The first part talks about the environmental health linkage. We examine the health impacts of the environmental degradation in China. And in the meantime, the book also addresses the non-health, the economic, social, political, and foreign policy implications of China's environmental health challenges. The second part will focus on the government response. Here we talk about the agenda setting, the policy formulation. We also talk about how the policy has been enforced, implemented. This is followed by evaluation or assessment of the policy effectiveness. So I conclude with some implications, the Chinese state and the China's future, both domestically and internationally. So many people ask me this question: why? What prompted you to write this book? I just told them for two reasons. The first is that was when that book project was kicked off in 2013. That was a time when smog, water, and soil pollution suddenly became headlines. You might recall how that in January, there was all this talks, about, the smog, the readings of PM 2.5, this is considered the most harmful type of air pollutant, how, the PM reached 40 times the maximum level allowed by the World Health Organization. That was also the year when China formally recognized the presence of cancer villages, right, in the country. The cancer villages is similar to the cancer clusters documented in other countries, but something also unique in China in terms of that it epitomized this link between environment and health. Now, I also want to study China's environmental health issues and try to use that sort of as a springboard to examine China's state capacity. Right? The question here is that when we talk about the China's rise, people naturally focus on China's economic prowess, military might, its projecting of soft power abroad, but few actually examined this important dimension of China's this dimension of state power, that has, in my opinion, important implications for China's rise as well. That is the Chinese state capacity to basically extract and mobilize resources, provide public goods and services, to have its claim to rule, voluntarily, willingly accepted by the people, and to enforce rules and regulations across its entire territory. Right? I think this dimension of the state power is a very important aspect, that we often ignored when we talk about China's rise and whether it indeed poses a threat to the Western countries. So I remember in 2000, a couple of years ago, in the Council on Foreign Relations, formed a study group on China's environmental health. Professor Jeff Sachs is kind enough to agree to serve as chair of the study group. And in the first session of this meeting, he asked me this question, right? What makes China's environmental health challenges so unique? I think that is a very legitimate question, right? Because we have this environmental health problems, but in UK, in Japan, in the United States, well documented, right? So why is China's experience so unique? Right? So here, I'd like to point out the 4 factors, right? That make Chinese environmental health crisis indeed distinctive, right? The scope, right? Pollution in China is a nationwide and sustainable threat to health. That is very different, from the Western countries where, the environmental problems tend to be localized and limited in duration, right? Chinese, the pollution, right, is a nationwide problem, that 80% of the people in the country are regularly exposed to pollution levels exceeded, those allowed, by the US, EPA. And you might also recall, right, in the spring of 2013, right, this smog, spanned, the entire, the basically 540,000 square miles of the country, affecting 800 million people, right? But this is something, that is not comparable, right? When we compare that with other countries. The second problem is the severity of the crisis, right? As James Fallows pointed out, no one now alive, has experienced anything similar in North America or Europe, except in the middle of a forest fire or a volcanic eruption. By this, he was referring to how serious the air pollution was in China. Then there's the issue of complexity, right? When we talk about, the toxic air, right, we can think of, the London fog or the Los Angeles smog. But what Chinese refer to as wumai or haze is actually a mix of both, right? That makes it even more challenging for the government to effectively address the problem. There is this issue of timing, right? As far as the China's rise is concerned, right, the United States did not face a major environmental crisis in its pre-World War II emergence as a superpower, right? China does not enjoy such a luxury. And in fact, as people's prosperity grows, but you actually found that the ordinary people no longer, right, just value, the earnings, but they now care more about the issues, including good health, right? So that gap between the public expectations and state capacity only increased, right, in the post-war era, right? Or you could say in the post 2012 era, right? That I think provided sort of a litmus test, for China's ruling or governance capacity. Okay, well, this book, as Michael just alluded to, whether talk about three major environmental health linkages, right? The first is air pollution. Second is water pollution. The third is soil contamination or foods, which is also can be a food safety concern. There's some additional linkages which the book also examined, like the impact of trash on public health. But we focus on the three types of pollution, right? First, the air pollution, right? Here, we are not going to, the book didn't address the household pollution problem, even though that causes, according to Chinese scientists, several 100,000 deaths on an annual basis. Just look at the outdoor ambient air pollution. It is linked to 1.24 million premature deaths in the country. That accounts for 40% of the global total. And of course, but of all those air pollutants that are major public health concerns, right? The PM 2.5, which refers to those particulate matter, that is 2.5 micrometers in diameter, smaller, it is the number one killer, right? Because it is responsible for more than 1.1 million deaths. That is 1/4 of the total global treatable deaths, right? It also accounts for 21% of this treatable global disease burden. Right? And then there's the issue of water and soil pollution, which has a significant and independent effect on people's health. As far as soil pollution is concerned, right? The Chinese official study shows that 1/5 of the country's farmland soil is severely polluted with toxic chemicals. That it means 36,000 hectares of farmland contain excessive levels of heavy metals. That itself leads to the contamination of 12 million tons of grains each year. Okay, and this water and soil pollution also contribute to this phenomenon of cancer villages. That my study on this issue leads to the calculation of more than 351 cancer villages in the country. It is mainly located in eastern China, and it's more river-based and wide phenomenon. That makes the Chinese cancer villages different from the cancer clusters in many other countries. And there is this economic, social, political, and foreign policy implications. It has its impact on the national economy. It's taking heavy toll on social political stability, and even has foreign policy implications. If we just focus on the economic cost of the pollution, we use a value of a statistical life called VSL to estimate how much people are willing to pay to reduce mortality risk. Right? China lost 10% of the GDP to air pollution in 2013. But if we include the cost of non-fatal illness, instead of just the cost associated with premature death, the total cost could be up to 18% of China's GDP. Right? With that, we just talk about the air pollution by the cost. Right? It could be even higher if we consider the losses associated with water and soil pollution. And that air pollution, according to the AmCham data, is the top challenge for companies trying to recruit and retain talents to work in the country. Right? They have conducted the studies, I believe, since 2015. Well, this is from 2019. Right? It's from 2018. The 57% of the people said poor air quality was the main factor or main challenge for their organization's ability to recruit and retain talent to work in China. That is the top concern, right, compared to other factors like high cost of living. And there's also this food and water safe concern, which 36% of the responders, say that is also a top concern. We have also seen by the number of environment-related petition letters and complaints continue to increase, right, between 1995 and 2015. In fact, between 2011 and 2015, the petitions grew by more than 2/3, from 1.1 million here to 1.8 million in 2015. And so now environmental petitioners are recognized a subset of the huge population of petitioners in China. So that is why a Minister of Environmental Protection document said that environmental health is both a complicated scientific problem and a sensitive social problem about which people are highly concerned. It matters to social harmony and stability, states' lasting political stability, and national survival and multiplication. And there is also an international dimension of this crisis. It has an international region. If we include the PM 2.5, released from China's export sector, it accounted for 1.8 million tons of PM 2.5 in China's air. 60% of these emissions actually attributed to the production of exports, for the United States and other OECD countries. So, and if you further look at this 2014 study of the 2006 data for air pollution in China, they found that through that atmospheric transmission, pollutants produced by China's export industries actually accounted for up to 4% to 6% of the carbon monoxide recorded in the Western United States, right? Up to 11% of the black carbon pollution and 12% to 24% of sulfate concentrations. So if we include this international dimension, but China's environmental health challenges is also a global governance challenges, because it is a border concern that requires, the collective action efforts, from more than one country, that is China, right, to overcome that challenge. Well, while the situation was very serious, actually it took China decades, to recognize how serious the problem is, to formally define the problem from a condition into a challenge. Then finally, in 2014, launched an all-out war on pollution. Looking back, it seems that the murky and exclusive authoritarian system has not prevented international actors like foreign governments and social forces from influencing policy making in China. The U.S. Embassy, for example, played a very important role in including PM 2.5 as a core tenet in Chinese government response, and in democratization of China's air quality data. And social forces too, right? They played an important role in pushing for the inclusion of PM 2.5 in the China's air quality monitoring system. When they were frustrated, that the government was reluctant to introduce this new standard, the Chinese netizens launched a movement called "I Gauge Air Quality for My Motherland." That is apparently inspired by the popular 1960s propaganda poster motto, "I exploit crude oil for my motherland." That slogan actually stoked a grassroots campaign encouraging the public to take air quality monitoring into their own hands. So by 2013, the air pollution was formally elevated onto the government agenda. That was actually followed by a series of campaigns, action plans, try to tackle pollution in the country. As far as the policy enforcement efforts are concerned, the government indeed has undertaken a series of measures to boost transparency and accountability. Right? As far as accountability is concerned, they launched those new policy instruments, including environmental supervision talks, 约谈, 环保约谈, party administration shared responsibility, 党政同责, and the one post to two responsibilities, or 一岗两责 systems. This is considered some of these new policy instruments introduced to improve accountability in policy enforcement. In the meantime, they also increased the central authority and try to improve interdepartmental coordination. During the 2016-2017 campaigns against pollution in Beijing and other parts of China, they launched the so-called centralized environmental protection inspection, 中央环保督察, basically dispatching several thousand, I think 7,000 people across the country, right, to monitor, to supervise the implementation of the central environmental protection policy. Well, those efforts were facilitated by the centralized control under President Xi Jinping, right? When you have all those political resources concentrated in a superordinate figure, you have seen actual recreation of the Maoist bandwagon polity, right? Where the local government officials compete or rushed to jump onto the policy bandwagons of President Xi, to show their early and enthusiastic support of the government policies. And in this process, certainly, right, there's any present food dragging, disobedience, became rare. And in the meantime, President Xi also made efforts, to sort of institutionalize and routinize, those mobilizational tools introduced in the campaigns. In his words, right, I know that he understood that those campaigns, sought to achieve the short-term goals, but he hoped, by basically institutionalize those policy instruments, that it could be able to reach long-term goals as well. So, well, that leads to the next question, right? How successful is China's war on pollution, right? Especially if we consider that China launched this war in 2014, and now it's been more than 5 years. So it's time to give an assessment, right? It is very clear, right, that China has shown strong state commitment to pollution control. It is now the world's largest investor in renewable energy, right? They contributing to accounting for 45% of the investment in renewable energy. It has also, thanks to this assiduous efforts of pollution control, managed to drop the share of coal in the total energy mix. Now I think the share of the coal in the total energy consumption has dropped to below 60%. And then also, if you look at the concentration level of PM2.5 between 2013 and 2018, it actually saw an average of 46% drop, from 72 micrograms per cubic meter to 39 micrograms per cubic meter. We have also seen overall reduction in the percentage of polluted days since 2012. This shows the average, the annual average of PM2.5 concentration between 2013 and 2017 at the national and regional, by regional I mean the Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei, Jing-Jin-Ji area, and then the Beijing cities, the PM2.5 concentration, right? So official data show a clear trend of a decline or drop in the average of PM2.5 concentration. And that was also supported by the US mission data in China. If we count the percentage of days with mean average of PM2.5 concentration higher than 75, so if you have a day, have a mean average of PM2.5 concentration higher than 75, that means it's a polluted days, right? So the percentage of polluted days in these 5 cities which housed the U.S. mission, it's showed the overall drop of the percentage of polluted days. The caveats here is that the progress remain uneven nationwide. In some cities like Beijing, you have seen the significant drop of the PM2.5 level, but other cities you actually have seen the PM2.5 concentration level increased. There's also the increase in the concentration of other pollutants, like ozone. In fact, between 2014 and 2017, we have seen the ozone level increased by 17%. And in 2019, the ozone level increased by 6.5% over 2018. And third, even if you look at the improvement in air quality in Beijing municipality, right? This figure shows the percentage of winter days with bad air quality in Beijing between 2009 and 2016, right? So, by winter days, we count those the 3 months, right? The December, January, and February, right? So the percentage of winter days with bad air quality from 2009, 2016, actually fluctuates. We don't see actually very significant drop of the percentage winter days with bad air quality in the city. So given that there is an overall improvement of the air quality in the city, so you can basically conclude that most of the improvements actually occurred in the summer. Then if you also look at those steel output, right, in China, which is a contributor to the air pollution in the country, right? There is indeed a drop. There was a drop of the steel output since 2014, right? But then after 2016, you have seen the steel output level increased again, right? And now the 2019, actually the return to its highest level. So is the coal production and consumption. Right? The coal production and consumption sort of it was believed to be to peak in 2013. So we have seen the drop, right? Since then, but after 2016, right, both the coal production and consumption level increased, right? Even though the share of the coal in the energy mix dropped, now to below 60%. The COVID-19 outbreak actually makes the situation even worse, right? Because the post-COVID economic recovery threatens to wear away the past gains in pollution control. We have seen more construction permits being issued for coal-fired power plants in the country in the first half of this year than in 2018 or 2019. In fact, by May 2020, the concentration of the four main air pollutants, including PM2.5, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and ozone, actually all returned to or exceeded the monthly levels recorded in 2019. Then finally, there's this unintended policy outcomes. I'm not going to, for the sake of time, to explain the slide. Safe to say, that when you have this top-down policy structure, right? In the bandwagon policy, local officials, their incentive structures have changed in a way, they like to overshoot. That is to use the saying here, act more Catholic than Pope, right? When, for example, in Hebei, right, during the conversion of to the cleaning energy campaigns, right? The government plan was to convert 1.8 million homes in the province to clean energy by the end of October 2017. But implementation went so well, that more than 2.5 million homes ended up switching to gas or electricity, right? The problem is that the government could not guarantee, right, the supply of sufficient amount of natural gas, right? So when the winter came, many of those houses who have seen their, which have seen their this furnaces, the coal-fired furnaces being dismantled, shivering in the winter cold because of the shortage of natural gas. Okay? So to quickly wrap up, environmental degradation in China has not only brought a wide range of public health problems than previously thought, it has also taken a heavy toll on Chinese society, the economy, and the polity. Right? And since 2012, it is true, the state has enacted new laws, regulations, and action plans to tackle the environmental degradation problem. It has also introduced a number of new policy instruments, right, in the policy implementation stage, which has indeed been taking effect, right? Being in a way effective, that the government has started to turn the tables on air pollution, but the progress again is uneven. The health benefits, right, of the pollution control thus far remain limited, and mixed. The single-minded pursuit of pollution control has also incurred unintended and undesirable consequences on other policy fronts. So the case of China's environmental health governance essentially reveals a state that is remarkably resilient and fundamentally flawed. And that, I believe, has profound implications for China's future, both domestically and internationally. So with that, I'm going to stop there. Michael?
Great. Thank you, Yanzhong. Very, very interesting, fascinating talk. So as folks are populating their questions in the Q&A box, I think I might start us off with a brick here to maybe attract some jade from other folks. And so I wanted to pull out maybe a conclusion that you had or a question that you raised in your book that you that maybe get us a little bit more deeply into this topic around China's how China could address environmental pollution in a more durable sense. And you have this very provocative question in your book, which is, can China accomplish its stated environmental goals without a transition to democratic governance? And I believe your answer to this is no or unlikely, but I want to probe more deeply. And I'm curious to know, what is a recipe for success? If you don't like campaign style enforcement, you mentioned these ad hoc non-institutionalized mechanisms, is the answer more institutionalized mechanisms? Can laws and regulations alone address this problem? And I guess, have you seen any effects of maybe the more institutional aspects of including environmental goals into cadre promotion selection criteria in your work?
Well, thank you, Michael. That is a great question, right? Especially, you might recall that just more recently, right, President Xi Jinping, right, promised that China is going to reach this carbon neutral goal by 2060. That naturally raises all these questions, that whether this is doable, to what extent is achievable. So we're asking basically the similar questions here, that, I believe, the Chinese government believe, they have the solution to the problem, by relying on those institutionalized mobilization, right? So it's going to be still like a campaign style implementation, but they're going to institutionalize those policy instruments introduced in the campaigns, right? So that is going to, they believe, change the incentive structure and the behavior patterns of the local government officials by implementing those government assigned policy goals. So eventually they hope this is going to be internalized, by the government officials. Similar to the population control goals, right? When you invest, in the building the constituency, when you invested in strengthening the administrative capacities, when you actually make this like a norm internalized by the policy actors, right? They hope, right, that this is going to be achievable and help achieve the long-term goals. Just like population control. Initially, it was also launched as a campaign, but eventually, ultimately, it became institutionalized and internalized. So in 2016, where even though the government said we're going to lift it as the one child per couple, the policy, still the people are very reluctant to have a second growth. So I think that is what they hope, and certainly that is aided now, by other the policy tools, the high-tech means, right? The use of drones, basically to monitor, the policy behaviors, and the ability to manage people's expectation in a way also has increased. If we, I think there's this article. I think in World Politics, talking about performative governance. Basically the government, even though there's a lack of capacity to deal with the challenges, they might use languages, they might use those propagandas, basically to convince people, we are doing great things. Actually this is very successful. So that might explain why today there was not much discussion on the pollution problem, right? Since especially 2019. Well, that of course has something to do with the information control. But in the meantime, I think there's several problems, with this policy efforts. First, it's, as I suggested elsewhere, it remains too dependent upon the whim of the government, right? So the government has to be very consistent. They have to be always on the same page in terms of the pollution control. That once this, the leaders, but does not show coherence, or the campaign achieves their stated target, the leadership's attention could, slip, and the society then goes back to business as usual, right? The second problem is that in this top-down policy in structural, they won't, basically this is like a state-dominated process. They are not going to rely on, the participation of the non-governmental forces, right? They are not going to rely on independent court systems, but as we have seen here in the West, in order for that the policy to be sustainable, right, that you have to rely on the rule of law, right, the independent court system. That is why even though Trump wants to switch, he just can't, right? Many of this, well, this could be this legal challenges, that to the this previous this regulation, but actually was defeated, right? So and there's this. I think there's this third problem, as we just explained, right? When the government focus on this top-down approach, it's not going to be good at responding to new challenges, right? So you could be very successful in reducing the PM 2.5 level, but because this new challenge like ozone, which is also harmful to people's health, it is not included in the government policy target. But then the policy implementers, they're not going to pay attention to it. So this is how we have seen the reduction of the PM 2.5 level, but then you see the increase of the ozone level. So I think in the long run, they have to they have to rely on the rule of law, the participation of the non-state actors, to make this policy sustainable.
Thank you for that very comprehensive answer. So there's a lot of elements there, and we do have some questions popping up in the queue. But I wanted to pull just one more slightly, maybe just pull out a little bit. So that, we certainly have seen a lot of people. There's a lot of scholarship on how China's environmental problems are rooted in this kind of central local tension. You have principal agent problems. You have top-down rules, and then kind of local politicians that want to thwart those rules, get around them, co-opt the enforcement agencies, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess, do you think that view is true, albeit simplistic, that the local politicians are fundamentally kind of thwarting the center's environmental agenda? Or do you feel like it's more complicated, that there's actually what we're seeing as a discord at the central level over what are the fundamental priorities of growth or environmental quality, and thus placing somewhat more of the causes for policy failures at that central negotiating level, as opposed to the implementation of these local officials?
Yeah, I think, well, that's another great question. I think the central government recognizes this principal agent problem, right? That they try to, address that problem, by introducing all those measures like this performance target management, right? By making the environmental protection targets included by assessing the local government's performance. They also try to improve the institutional structure, by introducing the so-called vertical management, below the provincial level, basically, right? The county public, the Environmental Protection Bureau now is restructured to be a branch of the city Environmental Protection Bureau, right? While the city Environmental Protection Bureau is no longer, right, reported, to their territorial governments, but actually to the high level environmental protection departments. So they have tried to address this problem, but in the meantime, I think that this accountability will continue to be a challenge, to the policy makers, because first of all, when we talk about those tasks those local officials are required to fulfill, right? There's certainly not just the environmental protection, right? There's also like ensure, the social political stability. There's also economic growth, even though they no longer have this explicit, the economic growth targets, but included in measure the performance. But still, I think, given its implications of economic growth, on employment, and local standards of living, it has huge implications to local social political stability, right? So, the local officials still have strong incentives to sustain a certain level of economic growth. So that is why after the COVID, the spread is contained immediately. I've seen the local government officials say we need to accelerate the progress of development to make up for the loss incurred by COVID. So as long as that incentive, right, to pursue economic growth remains there, you're going to see that dilemma between pursuing growth and pursuing environmental protection, right? That will continue to haunt, right, the China's this policy process, and certainly will not bode well for environmental protection in the future.
Yeah, indeed. All right, so let's go to the questions here. So our first one here is from Lei Guang here at the 21st Century China Center. Lei asks, like any public policy, environmental policies create winners and losers. So who, and specifically regions and sectors, are the winners and who are the losers in the latest rounds of adjustments to the national environmental policy? And to that end, how has the national government dealt with this political problem?
Okay, I haven't given much thought on this question, certainly, but if you look at the well, that's a regional level, right? Compared to those hinterland regions, right? The poor provinces or cities, those wealthy eastern provinces, they actually have more incentives in cleaning up the environment, pursue a more proactive environmental protection agenda. In fact, there's a study which suggested that the regions, with a larger revenue base, actually are more have more incentives to implement essential environmental protection targets. So you would expect maybe those wealthy, eastern provinces or regions or cities, they believe they are actually the winners in this environmental policy process, and for those, right, those hinterland regions and provinces, they still needs this access to the revenues, but this and there's still this strong incentive for local economic growth. So they're interested in lure those polluted industries remains strong. So this crackdown on the environment is going to hurt the local economic growth. They also their revenue base. So they might become the losers, right? And then you look at the in terms of the there's different industries, right? That certainly was certain industries, as the under the dome has suggested those petrochem industries, for example, they potentially could be the losers, right, in this policy process. That is why they were so against Beijing's, this documentary, right? They said it was not scientific, it was, had ulterior motives, etc.
Yeah, no, and that dovetails nicely with I guess we consider a follow-up question by Alex Wang at UCLA, who's an expert on environmental law in China. And he was wondering this very question: who are the vested interests? So in the US, we know vested interests often play a role in blocking environmental action. And so the kind of counterpoint potential upside of your argument around the top-down centralized, more authoritarian nature is that centralized party apparatus would be able to get around those vested interests and overcome them. Is that somehow an upside, or do you think that that's not exactly how it plays out? And even in China, given all this centralization of those powers, you still have significant vested interests?
Great question, Alex. Well, the vested interest is they are when well, this is actually associated with this first question: who are the winners and losers? Right. So, for those the petrochemical industries, for example, by those polluted industries, they are certainly they have their strong interest by continuing to pollute and be resistant, there's the government environmental policy initiatives, and that maybe, as Alex has suggested, that when you have a centralized, political structure, the policy actors, they are if they're less tasered, they have more policy autonomy, right, in pursuing these environmental protection policy, right? That they are maybe compared to their Western counterparts, they are in a better position to pursue environmental policy, policy change. The question is that to what extent, right, they themselves also influenced by the vested interest, right? According to the Xu Geping, right? This considered as sort of like a father of China's environmental protection, right? This problem of China's the environmental policy implementation actually lies in the fact that this vested interest, they are just so strong, they actually hindered the effective policy implementation in the country. So he seems to indicate that even in a country like China, you would expect that the policy makers have more policy autonomy and flexibility, right, in pursuing their favored policy agenda. That is not the case.
Yes, indeed. So maybe we could turn our sights a little bit outside of China's borders. So we have a question here from Christine Hunfeld, and this is getting at what is China doing outside of China? So most notably Africa and Latin America. I presume the question is talking about the BRI and some of these other questions around environmental leakage and pollution. Do you see parallels with your own work in this book?
Yeah, well, it touched upon this issue of BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. That was certainly that is one of China's most important foreign policy initiatives. but it is also right considered, according to some China watchers, China's efforts to outsource pollution to other countries, especially those countries that have lax environmental regulations, including countries in Central Asia and the former Soviet republics, and maybe also Africa. Right, there was I cited one provincial governor said don't worry basically about the pollution in China, right? Because in decades they're all going to be outsourced to Africa, right? So that does seem to suggest, that this BRI, could be potentially a conduit, for outsourcing pollution, to other countries, similar to what the U.S. has been doing, right, by investing in China, right? And the Chinese export sector actually absorbed, actually a significant amount of this pollution, that should actually be happening in the OECD countries. So in a way, China's first, what they were, we talk about outsourcing the pollution from Beijing to other parts of the country. Now we're talking about, this extension, right, that the outsourcing, from China to other countries.
Yeah. So I wanted to, since you mentioned the 2060 carbon neutrality announcement in our last few minutes here, I wanted to bring in climate change. I know your book is not on climate change itself, but it's many of the same actors that are involved, particularly with the restructuring with the Ministry of Ecology and Environment. And it's oftentimes similar sources, and causes and potential remedies. And so I'm curious, we've seen a lot of action, a lot of recent announcements, most recently just this last weekend from President Xi Jinping, who announced that they were going to strengthen their commitment to the Paris Agreement. And I'm just wondering, do you feel that the conditions in China that you've laid out, are they more effective or less effective to deal with implementation of climate change or air pollution? It seems like, because those are different potential issues and those different remedies. Do you feel maybe climate change, more recently in countries?
Okay, Michael, but I guess I think I got what you want to ask. Basically, you want to connect the.
Sorry, my connection faded in and out. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. I guess I think you were talking about the achievability of the carbon neutral goals in 2060. In a way, these two are different issues, right? This climate change, air pollution, right? If you actually talk about, those the most common pollutants, that have health impacts, right? Including like ozone, right? Carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, lead, nitrogen oxide, and PM. None of them actually are greenhouse gases. But in the meantime, those greenhouse gases like the carbon dioxide and methane, they do also have health implications. They are considered that sort of hazardous, right? Air pollutants, and these two are also interconnected in a way that, as he correctly pointed out, right? The primary cause of air pollution is the burning of fossil fuel, right? That happen to be also a major contributor to climate change. So dealing with air pollution in China, a campaign against air pollution also helps address the climate change and issue, right? The problem here is that, when we talk about making China carbon neutral 2060, I think one of the major challenges that now all those lower hanging fruits, have no longer available, right? You talk about, that this is actually according to Professor Kaplis of MIT, right? Once those low cost measures to reduce coal exhausted, right? The installation of equipment to effect those end of pipe pollution control, where the effluents re-enter the atmosphere, it will involve the use of carbon intensive energies. That actually can increase carbon dioxide levels, emissions, and then hinder this progress, realizing China's pledge to make carbon neutral by 2060. I think this is the challenge that has not been that mentioned, when we talk about China's ability to achieve, the climate change goals, the carbon neutral goals in 2060.
Yes, it's a very good observation. And we're still seeing that tension play out over end of pipe controls or fuel switching in the design of China's carbon markets, for example. So very interesting. I think we're at time, but I wanted to thank you, Yanzhong, for giving us a brief look into your book. And I hope everyone goes out there and picks it up to get all of the much rich detail and sources that you have. And as I said, just a fascinating read, and using environmental issues as a lens to understand Chinese politics. It's very, very welcome, and I think it will be a good resource for going forward. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone, for participating in today's event. Thank you.